The Peterborough Chamber of Commerce proudly presents the 2021 Power Hour, a series of interviews with our elected officials, proudly sponsored by Cogeco and Your TV.
Hi, I'm Stu Harrison, and welcome to the Think Tank. It's my pleasure to welcome Maryam Monsef, MP for Peterborough Riding, and also the Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Rural Economic Development. I'm sorry I had to read it because you got a big job. That's a big title.
I appreciate the responsibility. How are you, Stu?
Good, good. I was thinking when I was preparing for this wee chat, it reminded me of sitting here with Erica Cherney, and we were actually preparing the two of us for an interview that I was going to do with her. But we knew that your announcement was coming, and sorry, not your announcement, the announcement of the federal cabinet, and we watched you get off that bus and walk up the driveway to Rideau Hall, and I'll never forget Erica's reaction. She was so proud. I think the entire community was really proud. So it's been a bit of a whirlwind, hasn't it, over the last 5 or 6 years, I guess now.
Yeah, I remember when I was trying to figure out if I should run or not. I talked to 150 plus people in the community. Erica was the first on that list, and at the time, she happened to be at PRHC. The cancer had come back, and she said, "Come see me." So I did. I took the bus, and I went up to her room, and she was sleeping. And I was like, okay, this is awkward. You can't watch people sleep, especially in a hospital room, but it's urgent. And she told me to come. So I'm just going to sit here, and I'll sit here for 20 minutes quietly without being weird or creepy. And if she wakes up, great. If she doesn't, it's a sign I'm going to get back on the next bus and go figure out next steps. I sat down, and like within 5 minutes, she woke up. She opened her eyes and she looked over, and that big smile and the that she used to do.
Yeah.
And she was my first conversation. She told me to read Best Laid Plans, and she said she'd have my back, and she said, "I think you're exactly what we need." And I remember the photo of the two of you that she said she texted over that day.
Yeah.
It's been quite an experience, to be sure.
Mm.
But what Erica taught me early on was do it for the love of community and for no other reason, because it will be hard. There will be good days, there will be hard days, but if you do it for the love of community, you'll be okay even on the hardest of days. And she's right. She's right.
How do you find the balance between being the MP for the community and having all of the rest of the responsibilities that you have? It must be tough. You must have quite a team.
I have the best team. And one of the best things about politics is that it brings together under one tent, if you will, really special people who care a lot about their community and their country. And I have been so fortunate since the very beginning of this journey that I've been surrounded with people who are caring, who are thoughtful, who have experiences and advice and wisdom to share. And so key to anybody's success, any leader's success, is a team. And yes, my team helps navigate a lot. I have the longest mandate letter in government. I have 3 deputy ministers. I have 1 secretariat. I have, the responsibilities for women and gender equality and rural economic development. I built a department from an agency into a department that's never happened before. And then all the ups and downs of life and politics, it's my team and it's the community who keep me grounded. This is paid staff, of course, as well as volunteers who've been there since the very beginning. And I am so grateful to them.
My sense is that you didn't have to learn that. Some people, so-called leaders, have to learn to give away the responsibility, trust their people. My sense is that you didn't have to learn that. That was sort of an instinctual for you. Does that ring true?
I think every person has a gift. My gift is my ability to bring good people together to get things done. And, I feel very fortunate that people whom I call and text, they pick up the phone and they take the time to talk to me. Um, but that trust piece, I I never go into any situation blindly. That trust is of course earned, and I have my own ideas and my own vision for what I want to do, and the people around me help craft that vision into something that can be implemented. So I have learned over the years that the people you can rely on in tough times and the best, and I've also learned that some of the people who give the most helpful advice are people who don't necessarily come from the same walk of life as me. So that's also been helpful.
Nice. Yeah. Well, it pays to keep your ears open, that's for sure, and go in with that attitude. Without reflecting on your first 4 years, if you thought that was tough, uh, how about the last year?
Holy moly,
Yeah, it's
scary.
hard to imagine. Hey, so what are your reflections on this pandemic that we're in the middle of?
Well, the first year was a trial by fire in every way, every single day. And, the community had my back, and I was able to get good things done and keep going even when the days were hard. The second mandate, the 2019 election was a pretty toxic campaign. And by the time it was over, I think everybody was exhausted, across all parties in every community. And then we went into what we thought would be a tumultuous minority government. How could anybody have predicted that within a matter of days we would be using these things to communicate? Who had heard of Zoom before, March, April? I remember my first briefing with the Rural Economic Development Ministry, like the big briefing where all the officials come in and kind of bring the minister up to date over a course of many hours. I didn't want to go to Ottawa for it. It was during a sitting week, and I said, I'm staying in my riding, but wonderful officials, you can come here, or we can do it through teleconference. Two of my deputy ministers were able to come to Peterborough. We were able to walk them around downtown, show them the place, show them the office on Bethune Street, and give them a flavor for Peterborough. But one of my deputy ministers and officials teams weren't able to. So we used the phone. And I remember it was so strange to even bring it up as an option. And then it was so strange to get briefed up about broadband and spectrum and, ISPs and all that. But that ended up becoming the norm within 3-4 months. um those early days of the pandemic, Stuart, I was talking to my chief of staff, the amazing Peter Mitchell, and I was like, bring me back to those early days. And we were getting like 1,000 emails a day in those early days, 200-300 calls a day. The entire team was hands on, and of course we were trying to figure out, do we work at home, do we go to the office? And the phones just blew up with all sorts of people panicking about what was happening and what was going to happen to them. So, some of that is a blur, but you know, the thing that I remember the most from those early days were the panic phone calls of family members with loved ones abroad. And they were freaking out that the borders were going to close and they were there. And so, of course, the government set up basically a travel agency, if you will, to bring families home. In Peterborough, we were able to reunite over 50 families in those early days. But that's when it really hit home that, dear God, this thing is going to last a while, and it's going to create all sorts of shifts and disruptions in people's families, as well as the entire new way that we have to do work in politics. I could go on. We should all probably, on the other side of the pandemic, have a debrief or a therapy session about how everything just changed on that March 11th, and it'll never be the same again.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I'm not sure if you can hear it, but we have a train going by
Ha, you
my
timed
office
this.
here.
You timed this,
Yeah,
didn't you,
I
Stuart?
called ahead
I
for
knew it.
sure. Yeah, it's not a via train, or at least not yet. I'll get there. The the reflection for me is that we continue to learn, like we continue to be amazed at just how difficult the situation has been. We're coming up on the first anniversary. Who would have thought? I can remember specifically you saying, prepare for a marathon, not a sprint. And we're still looking for that finish line. So there's a lot of lessons learned, and it's definitely not worthwhile second guessing. It's not certainly in my nature, but I think in the end, to your point about having a debrief, there's a lot of lessons to be learned. Any reflections on that?
I think one of the best things that we did locally in those early days was all of us local leaders picked up the phone and said, let's come together so that we can coordinate our responses, because there's going to be a lot of broken telephones. We can't be in the same room together. And those weekly leaders calls, that's a best practice that I really want to, encourage all of us to continue, no matter what happens with the next phase of the pandemic. I think that the reliance on science and evidence has been smart. That's been a really good foundation. And another positive outcome that's come for, I think, every public service at the municipal, provincial, federal level, as well as an Indigenous leadership, is that those systems and timelines that were in place pre-COVID, that we were able to say, nope, we got to close the timeline. We got to deliver quickly. CRA was processing, what was it, 1,000 CERB applications per minute, getting money directly into bank accounts. My own departments, we were able to shrink a lot of the red tape and the processes in place. Those are really good lessons in when we had to take risks, when we had to be innovative, when we had to find new ways to work together. We figured it out in a matter of days. And the other lesson, of course, for the pandemic, we are so much more connected and dependent on each other than we realize. We are so interdependent. What happens on the other side of the world has a direct impact on how things go for individuals and families in Peterborough, Kawartha. And then, the systems designed to support the quality of life and the economic prosperity of communities. Well, all these systems are actually set up on the premise that there will be people, mostly women, who will care for our loved ones. And this reckoning that's happening in the middle of the pandemic, from Black Lives Matter to, Me Too's in our institutions, to essential workers and just how essential they are to our survival, and women being hardest hit, and Black and racialized women on the front lines of the pandemic. All of these lessons continue to inform what we do next, how we build the foundation for recovery, and hopefully a new social contract that recognizes these essential workers for the value that they bring to our economy and our communities.
Yeah. I was listening to an interview with Dr. Bonnie Henry this morning, who's been one of the stars of public health during this crisis. But she was also in Toronto during the SARS crisis and wrote a book afterwards, and essentially predicted everything that has happened. But even she said she had no idea how interconnected we were, and how fast it would be, and how global it would become, affecting every corner of the planet. So if you can amaze Bonnie Henry, it's pretty easy to amaze you and I, right? It's certainly been a ride. You mentioned the effect on women, the women, new Canadians. There's pretty specific when you drill down. Actually, you don't even need to drill down; just scratch the surface. There's certainly it's been pretty sector specific as to the people that have been affected more so than others. And I know sort of under the umbrella of a spring budget and continued relief, you're looking through that lens. So where are you at when it comes to the ongoing supports for Canadians?
women have been hardest hit by COVID. Everybody's having a hard time right now. Let me be clear about that. I have yet to talk to anybody who's okay
Mhm.
in the middle of all this, no matter how good you have it, no matter how solid your security in your housing and in your financial and in your relationships may be. No one I know, no one I've spoken to is okay right now. So let me just be clear about that. And if somebody needs mental health supports, which I think we all do as a psych major here, the Wellness Together app is available. Please look it up. It's got really great resources, including time with counselors, professionals, confidentially, of course. But women have been hit hardest. They've been hit hardest in terms of jobs lost, hours of work lost, increase in unpaid care work when the kids are at home, learning online. It's usually moms who are helping with, who are teachers and tutors, as well as working from home. And of course, we've seen increases in the rates of gender-based violence and violence against women and children across the country, online and in their own homes. So women have been hit hardest. And as you said, Stu, it's those racialized women, Black women, newcomers who are on the front lines of the fight against COVID in roles that have been deemed essential, whether it's in our grocery stores or in our long-term care homes or in our hospitals or cleaning, our teachers, my goodness, our
Mhm.
early learning and childcare workers. So we started, at the very beginning of the pandemic, applying an intersectional feminist lens to our response. And to folks who are like, oh dear, what does that actually mean? It means that we started right away looking at who's getting the CERB and who is not. Are people in rural communities taking advantage of the wage subsidy, for example, the same way that urban and suburban Canadians are? We started thinking about, well, the needs of Indigenous communities are going to be different. The history of colonialism and racism there, with all the ways that previous um, diseases and pandemics and epidemics have been used against them and have disproportionately harmed them. Well, we got to have a different support system and a different response there and in northern communities than the rest of Canada. The women who were going to be looking after the women and children leaving violence and abuse, we got on the phone with them within the first 48 hours of the pandemic, and those women told us, make sure that shelters and sexual assault centers are safe and their staff are paid and they have the laptops they need to pivot. And so we did that. Women have been hardest hit. We're keeping track of it. We're collecting disaggregated data, as well as those in rural communities, but also in our fall economic statement, in the speech from the throne. The finance minister herself, openly feminist, on measures like universal early learning and childcare, she says, as a working mom and as a mother, I am nose to the grindstone to get this done. And there's a recognition too that Canada's recovery from the pandemic will not be complete if we don't get women back to work. Women's labor force participation has been declining since the beginning of the pandemic, and it hasn't stopped. It hasn't stagnated. It's still going. And if we're not careful, and I know I'm talking to business developers, economic developers, if you've told us this, if we don't stop this, we're not going to get these women back to work. We're not going to be able to fill vacancies that are going to be, urgently needed to be filled. Businesses are not going to be able to innovate as well. And then, of course, if this rate continues to go down, we are going to set back decades of progress in getting women's rights moving forward, in women's safety and health and labor force participation, and Canada can't afford that. So that's going to be a foundation for our Canada-US relations. It's going to be a foundation for the upcoming budget, which I think will be the most significant budget in modern Canadian history. And we're going to keep track of it as we have been. We're collecting the data and we're listening to communities on the ground so that those eyes and ears inform outcomes as well.
Hmm. Well said. I was going to go back and ask you to sort of further clarify the word feminist, but I think you just did. So I won't. I don't think I have to. I have to go back. But it reminds me of an announcement that I just heard yesterday from your department on Canada's Feminist Response and Recovery Summit. Tell us about that.
So we've never done this before. It's going to be on Zoom. On March 8th and 9th, we sent invites to 64 of Canada's most renowned feminists, economists, leaders on the front lines of the fight against COVID, community leaders, and 59 of them said yes. So there's an interest in having a conversation about how are women landing? What can we do to ensure women's health and safety outcomes are improved? And how can we ensure that we're working together to increase their labor force participation so that the economy gets back on track? The term she session and she recovery was coined by a Canadian economist, Armin Yaliznian, at the beginning of the pandemic. And she said, unlike previous recessions, which have affected men's jobs, male dominated jobs, and, the response in stimulus funding has been infrastructure jobs, which, are mostly male dominated. She said, this recession, this pandemic has hit women hardest. They're going to be key to getting us back on track. And unless we focus on things like childcare, on housing security, on food security, on the wage gap, on gig workers, on women's voices at the table, we're not going to be able to rebound as a country. And so this summit is part of the work our government's doing, leading up to the same week when we acknowledge the first year anniversary of COVID, to say we're going to work with strong feminists across the country to create 1 million jobs and to ensure that women's safety and health everywhere in Canada is improved. And you're invited.
Nice. Yes. Well, I will be signing up. I just saw the notice, so I appreciate being included. You mentioned the spring budget. I know you had an opportunity to talk to our new finance minister. Can you sort of localize that conversation a little bit, and what do you see in the spring budget that pertains to Peterborough?
Well, I don't see the budget yet. The very smart people at finance and the prime minister and Chrystia Freeland are working on that right now. Today is February 26th. I don't know when this will air, but happy birthday, Mina. My sister's birthday's tonight. And the budget is coming up. But earlier this week, the window for pre-budget consultations closed. So we've heard from across the country, and I'm so thankful to everybody in Peterborough, including the Chamber, including Trent and Fleming, and colleagues who submitted on behalf of Peterborough Kawartha their priorities. The budget is going to focus on COVID first and foremost. How do we ensure that we continue to support Canadians with whatever it takes for as long as it takes? What do they need right now? It's going to focus on, the values that we have as a government, supporting the most vulnerable, supporting women, supporting racialized folks, those with disabilities and exceptionalities, and more support for rural Canada as a foundation for our recovery. And it's going to, from what I've, in conversations with Chrystia Freeland in cabinet, from colleagues, Liberal caucus has been very vocal and active on this. It's also going to focus on what will set the foundation for growth so that we can get out of this recession faster. Mm-hmm. So for Peterborough, I thought the full court welcome that Peterborough put out there for our new transport minister, Minister Algabra, and making sure he's aware about the Via Rail being a priority for this community. I thought that was really well done, and certainly I've shared that with my colleagues since day one at the table. Peterborough municipal leaders who've had one heck of a job during the pandemic, and let me just salute every single one of them for giving all they've given to the community. They made some really specific asks that we have heard and responded to already, like, hey, can we have permanent public transportation money. And so that money's on the table. We don't have to wait for the budget. Now we got to figure out how to design it so that active transportation like trails and new ways of connecting the rural and the First Nation communities with the urban center are considered. That's, I think, our job. But what Peterborough can be sure of is that our priorities around housing, around climate action, around job creation that is inclusive, projects, deeply important to us all, like Via Rail, they're on the radar of folks and they're making those determinations. But that, this budget this budget is all and everything is predicated on the vaccine rollout moving forward smoothly and reducing community spread as the vaccine is rolling out. So, today AstraZeneca was approved by Health Canada. So now we've got 3 vaccines out there. We're going into a big lift, if you will, with vaccine rollout, with thousands of doses coming in. And so that vaccine rollout piece will be key. Our next challenge will be ensuring that communities and provinces have the capacity to administer the vaccine, and of course making sure that people, as restless as we all are, we keep following these guidelines, because the more we follow them, just a few more months, the quicker this thing will end, and then the quicker we can all get back to rolling up our sleeves, surveying the damage that has been done, working together to rebuild, kind of like we did after the flood in the early 2000s. That's the same approach we're going to have to take at the local level. In Peterborough, we will always have a strong voice in Ottawa, and I think in every order of government, in every legislative and chamber of decision makers.
Yeah. You mentioned the longest mandate letter in the history.
Not in history. I can't say history, in government right now.
Well, mandate letters are fairly new. I think the Prime Minister Trudeau may have actually introduced them. I certainly don't remember them being public in the past. That's for sure. So kudos to that. But here's just a couple of excerpts from yours.
Okay.
Accelerate the women's entrepreneurship strategy. Develop and implement an action plan to increase diversity within the public service. Implement the Universal Broadband Fund. Create a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system. Creation of an additional before and after school. So
bring it on.
Yeah, well, exactly. And this, goes back a little bit to having the team and the departments that you administer behind you. But in the context of that, and in the 4 or 5 minutes that we have remaining, what do you see? Not necessarily across the country for the purposes of this conversation, but within Peterborough, I'm thinking broadband and tourism and hospitality, one of the main pillars of our economy, devastated by the pandemic, via rail. What do you see as sort of top priorities for you as our MP?
Top priorities: housing. Getting through COVID is everybody's top priority. But for me personally, since 2015, I've been able to bring some $45 million in federal funding to the community to renovate, to subsidize, and to build new housing units to address the significant gaps that exist. So to date, there is about 1,670 units that have been supported, but I'm not done. And I was thrilled to see the city of Peterborough put on paper. I've been waiting like 2 years for these big numbers to show up. We can do 1,400 units. So I'm there, and I will do everything I can to help, I promise. Aside from housing, you mentioned broadband. The Universal Broadband Fund is within my purview, and we're rolling out every week rapid response for this construction season projects that have been approved. And so you'll see more of that for our region as a whole. We need that connectivity as a region, not just in this riding. And rural transit and rural transportation, they're going to stay at the top of my list as well. Not just Via. And Via, let me just give if there's anybody from Tony Smith's team or his family tuning in, that man is unforgettable. He is loved, and we're going to keep chugging along on the Via Rail file in his memory, of course. And climate action for our community. When those kids hit the streets like they did during the 2019 election, something changed. For the first time ever, climate change was on the ballot box at a federal election, and so those will be priorities. And Stu, if I'm going to be able to navigate, life and politics and the various responsibilities I have, it'll always be because of my team. And it will always be because of community leaders and partners who recognize that none of us do this work alone. Nothing moves forward just because of one person. So I'll continue to rely on those who've been there, and I hope many more who can roll up their sleeves so that we can bring back jobs we've lost, so that we can make sure that universal early learning and childcare, as that program is designed, Peterborough has a strong voice in it, so that we get women into our workforce. And I'm always going to be open to ideas and conversations that come from different across the partisan spectrum. We're all in this together, as the warden says. I am here to serve you and to make sure that in decades from now, people look back on my time as your MP and our time as leaders and say, those people, they thought ahead. They had a vision, and they had a vision to make this community better and stronger and ensure more sustainable growth. I want to be remembered that way, and I want to work with anybody who is willing to hustle despite all the challenges to make that vision a reality.
Nice, strong ending. I don't think I know that. I hope the next time that we get together, it's with a coffee at the Silver Bean and not on Zoom. So I just want to say thank you and appreciate the time that you've taken today. Thank you.
Oh, the Silver Bean. Thank you so much, Chamber and partners, for bringing us together. I appreciate you.
Our MP, Maryam Monsef, and that was the Think Tank.
Our Think Tank episode is brought to you by Merit Precision Molding, Microwage Peterborough Whitby, Canopy Support Services, and TD. The 2021 Power Hour, podcast, videocast, signature event. Details at peterboroughchamber.ca.